Rogue One, a Star Wars story, hit theaters on December 16th, 2016. Starting the movie without the iconic crawl that we all know was a clear statement telling us that this movie was truly a spin-off and not part of any of the larger trilogies. However, this did not make it feel any less important to Star Wars fans worldwide. As I personally enjoyed the movie, I recognize that it did many things both good and bad. In this review, I'm going to break down what I thought was good and bad about the film and why. Of course, I do recognize that there are a lot of overlapping, debatable points that fall into a very middle ground and very gray area. I'll do my best to be a critic of this movie, not only as a Star Wars film, but as a film in general. So, without further ado, let's get into it. One thing I loved about this movie was how gritty it was. I remember everyone talking about how they wanted this movie to be like the Star Wars version of Saving Private Ryan, and in a way it kind of delivered in that sense. I mean, you have the PG-13 movie, you have a little bit more action, it's not about Jedis and Sith and the Force, it's about the everyday rebels, the everyday people fighting for a greater goal, and we see this a lot through how dark the movie is. I mean, spoiler alert coming up. I forgot to warn about spoilers, but if you haven't seen it at this point, I mean, what are you doing watching this video? Go watch it. But everyone died. So, that's just so unlike any other Star Wars movie we've seen where everyone who was a main character died. One thing I really like about this is that we have no more extra characters to worry about, and we don't have to worry about seeing them come back later in, no more theories about them coming back in episode 8 or 9 or whatever. They're dead. They did their part. Their story has been told, and it's over. Because we see that, I guess they brought Darth Maul back, and that was just pretty ridiculous. I mean, that's a whole story in itself why that was a ridiculous decision. But it's kind of nice knowing that a character or characters in Star Wars can just have their story told, and that's the end of it. There's going to be no theories about them coming back in any way. They're done. Their story has been told. I probably just said that 100 times, but I thought that was a really cool thing that it did. I absolutely love that. Probably my favorite scene in the entire movie was that awesome scene with Darth Vader at the end. I mean, that scene just made me so excited, especially compared to the rest of the movie, which I thought a lot of it was kind of bland, kind of dull through the beginning and middle half of the movie. And then you get Darth Vader coming in, lightsaber out, force powers ready, just absolutely destroying these rebels. I mean, just mowing them down. Absolutely ridiculous, absolutely amazing. And seeing those ships from the original trilogy didn't hurt either. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it was my favorite part of the movie, largely due to nostalgia. So, that's kind of a negative thing. I might get back to that later, talking about how it's kind of riding the coattails of the original trilogy in many ways. But I absolutely loved that scene. I mean, it was gritty, it was violent, it was exciting, and it really just showed the sacrifice that these rebels were willing to make. I mean, they're going up against this huge enemy, and there's no glory in this. They're getting slaughtered. They're helpless, and they're passing the plans back. I love how that was such a literal transition, whatever, of how these plans got from person to person to person in the rebellion, and how many people died along the way, and they're just getting literally passed back as they're getting killed. And that guy at the end with the door shut, he's like, help me, and he ends up just passing the plans back and dies and does his part. He sacrifices himself, and I just thought that scene was awesome. I wish we could have seen more of that throughout the movie. I mean, obviously too much of that would have kind of oversaturated that and made it less special. What can I say? I love that. Another thing I really liked about this movie is the acting performances. I thought they were all solid around the board. I don't think any of these are near, Oscar nominations, which is expected in a Star Wars movie. I believe the only actor even nominated for an Oscar was Alec Guinness in the original Star Wars, which is pretty amazing. But I don't think any other actor has been nominated. But I really like Felicity Jones. The emotion she showed in the scene where her father was talking about the plans and all that when they're on, I don't even remember the damn planet's name, but with Saw Gerrera, all that was great acting. she did just a solid job throughout the movie. Ben Mendelsohn, as director Krennic, was awesome. Brutal. Just a great performance by him. Really like that. Same with Donnie Yen. I loved his character too. It really brought a new side of Star Wars that we haven't seen yet. Someone who uses the Force and knows the Force, but doesn't physically use it like a Jedi or a Sith. Doesn't have the power. I don't know why, if he doesn't have the full teaching or the midichlorians or whatever you want to say, why he can't actually lift objects. But he's blind and he kicks ass with that staff. So that was amazing, you know. The acting was solid. No complaints there, really. So yeah. It was also kind of interesting that we got to see a return of a character from the Clone Wars, which I thought was kind of cool, bringing the lesser known side of the universe together to the more mainstream, because not as many people have seen that show. So I thought that was really cool, even though personally I hated Saw Gerrera in this movie. I don't really want to get into that. Why I hated him, that Truth Octopus scene was just weird. He was just an eccentric guy, not very funny. I didn't understand his motives too much. I mean, I guess he was kind of painted as an extremist, but not a big fan of him. But that was kind of cool that they included him, and I actually didn't even get that at first until my friend mentioned that, hey, that's the guy from the Clone Wars. I'm like, oh crap. So interesting, nonetheless. So for pros, that's really all I have that I really liked about the movie. Now let's get into the cons. So the one con that everyone's talking about is that the film does not utilize CGI in the way that it should have, especially with the digital recreation of past characters, most notably Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin and Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia. Now, I honestly didn't have a huge problem with this. I really think people are overreacting about this. I mean, did I notice that they were CGI? Yes. Some people didn't. I actually heard some people, I don't really know how they didn't notice they were CGI. I mean, to me it was pretty obvious that they were not real. And of course, we know Peter Cushing is not alive, and Carrie Fisher is not that young looking. So, of course they're CGI, but it just didn't ruin the movie. I mean, one thing I think they could have done was shot around that and created, I don't know, some more creative ways of looking at that. For example, when we saw Grand Moff Tarkin earlier on in the movie, we saw him like looking out a window, and we saw his reflection in the glass, and I thought it would have been cool if we would have just kind of seen the back of him, maybe seen his reflection, maybe had a side shot of him, but not really focus on his face so much. That's the way they could have done it. That would have been cool. We still would have known who it was. But they decided to go all out and do this. And I think the technology is really cool. I don't think it's quite there. I think it will get there eventually. But right now it's still in early stages. And while it did look good, there was something off about it. Same goes for Carrie Fisher. One thing, as much as I love this scene towards the end with Darth Vader and all that, when it went to Carrie Fisher, I was thinking in my head, please don't turn around, please don't turn around, please don't turn around. I do not want to see her face. And I honestly didn't think they would have her turn around. I would have loved to seen the plans pass to her as a side view or a back view, just kind of seeing her veil and not seeing her face, and have her say nothing, and that would be the end of it, and that would have been awesome. She turned around, had to say something, felt very anticlimactic, and while it looked like her, it didn't look like her. So I feel like they could have really worked their way around this problem, this age gap problem, with just creative camera angles and different shooting. But they chose to do it, and it's not a big deal. I think people need to calm down about it. It does raise questions or not whether this is ethical, whether this is okay to do for the actors and their families, and that's a whole debate in and of itself, so I'm not going to get to that, but it is a very interesting technology that is understandably controversial. Another thing I really did not like about this movie was the weird scene of Darth Vader in pretty much what appeared to be Mordor. It really reminded me of Mordor and Sauron's Tower. I could just picture the eye up there looking at everyone, looking at Frodo and the ring, and I pretty much laughed when that came on screen in the movie, and I turned to my friend. I'm like, "Hey, look, it's Mordor," and we were just kind of laughing about that. But I know it was Mustafar, but that felt kind of weird. And Darth Vader in the Bacta tank, didn't like that scene too much. But what can I say about it? Darth Vader and Krennic were kind of arguing there, and Darth Vader choked him. I believe it was Krennic at least. And he said, "Be careful not to choke on your aspiration." And I thought that was one of the weirdest things ever. I kind of cringe at that. I could not picture Darth Vader using a pun in that way. So I thought that was a really weird thing for him to do, because I've never remembered Darth Vader using puns like that. Like, he said kind of funny, insulting lines, but never that blatant. It wasn't really a good choice, but whatever. Some people laughed at it. I thought it was stupid. Another point is about the character K2SO, and he was okay, but I really liked his death scene, actually. That was really cool. But honestly, he was just too much like a knockoff C-3PO. And I feel like we're getting this trend in Star Wars movies, that there's only two types of droids. There's the R2 type, which is the chipper, sassy, BB little droid. Of course, we have BB-8, who I love BB-8, but very similar to R2. And then we have this analytical professor, sarcastic kind of whatever droid, like C-3PO, and in this case, K2SO. And it really just felt too much like a cheapened version. Like, you're going to the store, you're excited to get this awesome C-3PO action figure, and the box looks great, and it's all shiny, and then you open it up, and it's a cheap knockoff of him. It's not the official thing. It's paint color is off. That's kind of what it felt to me. It just did not feel like the real thing. I was looking for a C-3PO, and I would love to just see a droid that is totally different personality. That would be great to see in some of the other movies. So that's just kind of not a huge disappointment, but one of the minor things. Another thing, I kind of touched on this earlier, that I don't like about this movie is how much it relies on the original trilogy. It really bases things off of success and the nostalgia of the original trilogy. And of course, Force Awakens did this to kind of ease us into the universe, but I thought Rogue One could have stood on its own a little better. I know that it's directly related to it, but certain things, especially at the end, like my favorite scene, seeing those old ships, seeing Darth Vader, it relied on the original trilogy. And look throughout the entire movie, and there's this scene with the "I don't like you" guy, seeing him on the planet. I honestly forget all the planets' names. I'm sorry, but that brings me to another point. But anyways, kind of rambling here, but I just thought that wasn't the best thing. I wish they could have stood more on their own, and I hope we see that, as we've had two movies that have really ridden off the original trilogy with the humor, with the plot, with all the references, and get something completely fresh. So I hope we can see more of that. My last con that I was just kind of getting into that were the planets. How I mentioned multiple times that I do not know their names. And I felt the writing under them was stupid. It didn't seem like Star Wars to me. And it just doesn't feel fun to learn planets' names anymore. There's too many. We're getting just an overload of these planets with new names, yet they're the same thing. A desert planet, Jakku, that could have just been Tatooine, and that's in The Force Awakens, I know. But these planets just aren't, who cares? They're just pointless now. And I don't know, I really pride myself on knowing a lot of Star Wars trivia, but I just don't care about learning the names of these planets. So that is what it is. Not a huge con. I know that's pretty nitpicky that I don't care about the locations anymore, but that's really it. Now getting me to some of the middle ground of the movie. I kind of talked about how there's a lot of overlapping middle ground. Of course, you may disagree or agree with what I said earlier in regards to the pros and cons of this movie. But there's some things I thought were truly middle ground. And the one thing I thought was the biggest point that I really don't know what to make of it is the question, is this film necessary? And this is a problem with these spin-off films. Are they necessary? Do they add anything to the universe? And I think the question is no, they're not necessary. But who cares? I'd love to see him anyways. I'm going to pay money to see him, and Disney knows this. They know this, that people are going to spend money, so they're going to make all these films, right? And as long as they do a good job on them, as long as they do at least as good or better than they did on Rogue One and Force Awakens, I'll be very happy. But what do they add? What are they going to add? And I guess the stories have already been told. The original trilogy has been told. Technically, we didn't need a prequel trilogy. We didn't need New Force Awakens. I guess we called this sequel trilogy, probably. We didn't need those. We could have just had this contained original trilogy, but Star Wars is more than that. It's a universe. It's, I know I'm getting into this more, going outside the film here and talking about the concepts of Star Wars as a universe. So, I really don't know what to make of that. What do you guys think in the comments? Do you think Star Wars or Disney should keep pumping out these movies, or do you think they should hold back on them? Obviously, they don't care what you think. They're probably still going to make a lot of movies, but I care, and I think it'd be a very interesting discussion. So what did you think of this movie? Let me know in the comments. Feedback is greatly appreciated. Until next time, guys, Average Reviews signing out.